DTFF.
Once again, here is Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football with your hosts, Dustin Lunt and Jake Trowbridge.
Welcome back to DTFF, folks. Happy Tuesday evening if you're joining us live. As you can see, we have got a packed show tonight with two great guests joining us, and we are going to be talking all things rookies with the NFL draft happening this last weekend, which Jake and I decided in the fantasy football community is our Halloween because there's always surprises and tricks going on. And oh man, was it something. That first round especially was just unlike anything I've seen in recent memory. But before we get into all that, let's do some introductions, go around the horn here. Obviously, you all know my co-host, Jake Trowbridge. Jake, how are you doing this evening?
Hi, I'm doing good, Dustin. After the dust has settled from the NFL draft, which you're right, is Halloween. One, because I think as Packer fans, we're just scared of it. So that kind of fits the bill. But I did not leave this year's draft being as scared as I thought I would. And for that, I'm thankful. And so I'm ready to discuss these rookies.
Excellent. Yes. And then our two guests joining us this evening, because let's be honest, they're much bigger experts on NFL rookies in the Debbie community than Jake and I both are. We coming back to the show for the third time now, I believe, Zac Reed. Welcome back, Zac. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. You talk about Halloween, though, slasher films. I'm a Patriots fan. This draft was abysmal for me. So I'm glad to be talking dynasty rookies and not the NFL draft proper.
We'll take your mind off.
Yes, that's right. And then first time on the show here, losing his DTFF virginity this evening is Sam Wallace. Welcome, Sam. How are you doing?
Well, when you put it that way,
it's a very special moment.
It's incredible. I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this ever since Jake extended the rose offering to me a while back to jump on tonight. Yeah, looking forward to chatting rookies with you guys. And as a fellow Packer fan, I will agree with Jake. I did not leave this draft as distraught as I have been in the past. So it was a good weekend.
Mm-hmm. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's not waste any time. Jake, should we just hop right into our drunk trade of the week this week?
Oh, you better believe it.
Yeah, let's do it and not waste any more moments.
Drunk trade of the week.
Oh, gentlemen and listeners, we have such a fun one to talk about tonight. This week's drunk trade of the week comes from Reddit. Ceasefires on Reddit, but not spelled cease like C-E-A-S-E. I think it's a play on words that I'm not smart enough to understand, but they submitted this trade. They said, I got drunk enough mid-season of 2018. So hop in the DeLorean here for a minute. Trading away my first round pick for John Brown seemed like a good idea. It wasn't, they say. Now, there's not a lot for the nuts and bolts of this trade here to get into. I think we can all appreciate this trade for what it was. It was a moment of weakness, probably. They had very high hopes for John Brown. Now, keep in mind, okay, 2018. So with just that, I want to see down this memory lane here, if everybody can put themselves in those shoes. And at the time, would you have been excited for this trade? Let's start with Zac. In 2018, mid-season, just off the cuff here, do you think you would have been happy to get John for a first round?
No, not for a first round, but it's one of those things where I think we've all been there, right? We've been at the bar. We've had like, you start to feel happy. Then maybe you have one too many, like a Jaeger. And then you're like, and you size up that guy at the end of the bar and you think you want that smoke and you realize that you don't want that smoke. I think that's what's happening here.
Perfectly said. I love the smoke reference, by the way, to top that all off. Sam, do you think that you would have been at least okay in 2018 getting John Smoke Brown for a first round?
I mean, honestly, probably, because I don't even think I was in the Twitter fantasy community back in 2018. It was so long ago. So I'll probably been like, yeah, it's fine. But I really want to know the context. Like, did that first round pick turn into like Saquon Barkley? Like, that's what I want to know. I need to know what that pick ended up being just to really put the screws to this guy.
You want to know the level of awfulness that you should really be emphasizing here.
I mean, because I cheated a little bit and I looked up. In 2019, John Brown was a wide receiver 2. So you got like one productive season out of him, 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. But I mean, could have been a lot worse. But I really just need to know who that first round pick ended up being that he gave away.
If you want to look at the silver lining here, 2019 was John Brown's best fantasy season of his career. So you got him before he exploded for that 1 year. So I like the silver lining there. Dustin, do you have any additional silver linings here or any life lessons that you can impart from this trade?
No, the only thing I can think of that would make you think this was a good idea to trade it for a first round pick is, he had that just horrible time in Arizona, and this is when he went to Baltimore. So new landing spot, maybe a little hope for turning things around for his career. Because I know, for the most part, the fantasy community was always so hopeful that he was going to have that breakout. He definitely flashed at times, but that would be the only thing I could think of why you would think this was a good trade, other than being really, really drunk at the time. But I mean, you got, 1.5 okay seasons, I guess.
I mean, if Brown was the missing piece to his title run, that'd be great. But honestly, he probably ended up losing to the guy who drafted somebody really good with that future first. Like, that was probably the guy that knocked him out of the playoffs.
Yeah,
that's how karma works.
There's no way this ended well for him. There's no way.
You guys, are we sure that the John Brown breakout season isn't still just around the corner? I mean, can we say that definitively is what I want to know.
There's a non-zero chance.
By the way, before we move on to the rest of the episode, I have to cap this off here. I want to know, can anybody tell me the last team that John Brown played for and bonus points for what year it was? Anybody?
I'm looking at it right now, so I can't answer.
Damn you, Sam.
Yeah, I know.
I pulled it up too, so I'm not going to answer. So Zach,
damn you, Dustin.
And I have no idea. The last team I remember him on was the Bills, but there's got to be somebody after that.
He went to about 4 spots in between the Bills. He jumped around to Jacksonville, Las Vegas, and Oakland, I believe. He ended up playing a few snaps, though, last year for Tampa Bay. So there you go.
Unreal. The more you know.
Still technically on their practice squad. So he, again, could be just around the corner. That breakout. Add him to your rosters now.
So you're telling me there's a chance.
There is a chance. All right, that's enough of that. Dustin, you want to kick us off into the meat of the episode?
Yeah, let's get into it and not waste any time. So I think here we'll just go positional here. Because I think especially for Superflex dynasty purposes here, there's not much to talk about with the quarterbacks and the tight ends. Let's be honest. So those shouldn't take too much time. But the quarterbacks, I think we can say the NFL really told us what they thought about these quarterbacks. End of the day here. I know we all had high hopes with some of these QBs. Kenny Pickett, the only one drafted in the first round, going to the Steelers. How do we feel about that? I mean, personally, is it an upgrade over Mitchell Trubisky? Let's just throw it out there.
I think it has to be, at least on paper. I mean, look, Trubisky was a competent starting quarterback for about a day and a half with Chicago, so he was fine for fantasy purposes. But he was always going to be a bridge quarterback. I can't think of any mock draft that I saw heading into this past weekend that didn't have the Steelers taking Pickett, Willis, somebody. Like, we always just knew that the Steelers were probably going to invest significant draft capital into the position. And I really hope they give him every opportunity to succeed. Like, I hope he does well over the summer and the offseason. And he has ample weapons, a great running game, questionable offensive line, but just weapons galore all around him. So I really hope they give him the opportunity to do well. Because like you said, he was the only quarterback drafted in the first 2 rounds this past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Zach?
But for me, and yes, I think Pickett will be better than Trubisky. But I had somebody ask me about Pickett, and I said, I don't want it to. I get him ranked right now as my 109 in a super flex, and I just took him in a rookie draft. And I feel so bad about it because I don't like I didn't have good vibes with him coming in. He's fine, but fine is not what you're looking for in a fantasy football context. And so it not only speaks to how poor this quarterback class is, but also that there's a real big break right around that 109, 110 in a super flex. And so that's where I'm comfortable taking him, but you can't make me like it.
Do the size of his hands worry you?
No, I mean we had that same thing with.
It's an honest question.
Like we had the same thing with Burrow, and I know that Pickett's hands are a little smaller than
But
Burrow,
they're smaller than Burrow's.
That was the big. I did a Hootie and the Blowfish. I did 9 Inch Hands, a parody song for Burrow, and the hand size doesn't really bother me, but the play bothers me.
For sure. I think for me, the thing that it's encouraging is they invested such a high pick. So like if it would have been like a lot of these other quarterbacks that slid into like, a pretty decent spot, Atlanta as an example, then I'd be a little bit more worried. But I think it is just the actions of the team that for better or worse, he's going to get an opportunity. And whether it's good or not kind of remains questionable. But I agree. I mentioned to somebody earlier that I didn't really feel comfortable taking any quarterback inside of like the top half of this draft, even pre-draft. And that was even like, even if we saw 2 or 3 quarterbacks go in round 1 to some of these on paper ideal landing spots. So it didn't really change anything. It didn't really make it better, obviously, but it's kind of par for the course and then worse based on the draft capital.
So how much do we factor in, if at all, how interested are we in him, supposing he actually does win out the job because of the tools that are there around him? How much does, for a guy like Pickett especially, how much does that receiving core, who got its own additions, and we're going to talk about those receivers that were drafted here a little bit later too, but already walking into a guy like Deante Johnson, Chase Claypool, a Studley running back who performed very well last year, that kind of thing, is that enough to at least, let's say for 2022, make him interesting to you, or does that not factor in?
In like single quarterback redraft, absolutely not. Just because there's going to be so many other like Kirk Cousin type players that I would just much rather have on any given week if I don't walk away with a top tier option in the draft. In Superflex, I mean, he might break into the top 24. I don't know. I mean, if you want to rank him at like quarterback 25 for the start of the year, Kenny Pickett, Jared Goff, flip a coin. I mean, at this point for redraft, this is assuming he gets the job week 1. But I think it's because it's been so long since we've seen a quarterback other than Roethlisberger in that system. I mean, we have no idea how any other quarterback will do there. But I think if there's to be a culture, a system, a structure around him that I think will be supportive of him and give him the chance to succeed, I got to say the Steelers are got to be one of the most stable organizations just from a continuity perspective.
Yeah, my hesitation, though, is you can be a bad quarterback or a below average quarterback and that offense will still sustain. So like, again, like Baker Mayfield came in and he had Jarvis Landry and then he had Odell Beckham and everyone thought Njoku was going to be great. And he had Kareem Hunt and he had Nick Chubb and he still fell flat. And so you can have all of these pieces around a quarterback, but they still have to be a good quarterback for fantasy. Like for the NFL, you can get by. I think Pickett will be fine with Pittsburgh. I think that they can kind of mitigate his deficiencies and be okay. I am still reticent to say Kenny Pickett is going to be great for fantasy. I think you're hoping you have a QB2.
Yeah, that's fair. I like it.
Yep.
It's going to be fun. I like that we at least got one decent option in day 1 and in the top 2 rounds that we can at least sort of look at. But I mean, man, anybody that was taking the over on 2.5 quarterbacks in round 1 or the top 2 rounds really wasn't thrilled.
I'd like to talk about Bailey Zapp, who was drafted. Okay, we have a Patriots fan on the podcast here in Zach. I mean, that seems like it's destined for success, really, right?
Man, I was screaming for them to take Sam Howell and Bailey Zappi goes off, and it's just like, what are we? It's Belichick doing Belichick things, and sometimes. So for the last 20 years, it was fun having the smartest guy in the room. For the past 3, it hasn't been as much fun because, like, if you look at the Patriots drafts, it's not great. I do like what they do with quarterbacks, where they draft. I mean, even when Brady was here, they drafted quarterbacks fairly often and fairly highly. So second, third, fourth round. It doesn't surprise me that they're taking quarterbacks. I mean, Mac Jones isn't Brady, and that's they've actually got second round picks for multiple quarterbacks. I mean, if you go back through what Belichick did, he got Castle was a second round pick, and then Garoppolo. So yeah, so you see them do that. Zappy was not the direction I would have gone, but I'm not coaching the Pats. I'm not the GM, so I'm here just living the dream, watching them do their thing, watching Tyquan Thornton run real fast down the field.
That pairing. Imagine those two together during training camp. It's going to be insane.
Glorious. Yeah. So the other highly touted quarterbacks are, I use that word loosely, that we are all talking about going into the draft here. None got drafted then round 2. We go into round 3. We had 3 drafted in the 3rd round with Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, Matt Corral. Are we, I guess I'm not expecting any of them to start this year. I think this could be a sit on the bench for a year. Maybe next year they'll get that opportunity. But I think, again, with all 3 of these teams that drafted them, it's not a guaranteed thing that they're going to get the chance to start next year either. Chances are these, at least with Atlanta and Carolina, they're going to be bad again this year. So they're going to have another high draft pick next year with this draft class next year that is already talking about, at least 5 quarterbacks probably be drafted in the first round. We may not even see these quarterbacks that were drafted this year get a chance to play. So do you guys feel the same way about this, or am I totally off base?
Yeah, I think you're right. From a football perspective, I loved the picks, though, by those teams in the 3rd round at that point. Like, it was fine not taking them in round 1. I was even fine not really any of them going in round 2. But once round 3 came along and Ridder went to Atlanta, like, I love the pick for Willis to Tennessee. Like, that's great. It's not a lot of draft capital that they sunk into him. They addressed some earlier needs in the draft. And yeah, he'll sit for a year. He might sit for 2 years. I know it's been more uncommon that rookies will sit longer like it used to be 10 years ago. It's kind of
unless you're the Packers.
Come on. Like it used to be for a normal organization that, doesn't anyways. Now I'm all thrown off. Thanks, Dustin. But I see what you mean. But with the 3rd round draft capital, I think that's just such a good pick for all 3 of those guys. Like, I would love to see Ridder play this year because I don't think Mariota is the long-term option there. I think he was always going to kind of be a bridge option for them, similar to Trubisky in Pittsburgh. From a football perspective and fantasy, I think it would be great for them just to give Ridder the reins and just let him go. Like, who knows? Maybe he's good, maybe he's not, but they probably won't just because of the contract that they gave Mariota. He'll at least probably start part of the year. If he gets hurt, doesn't do well, then maybe it forces his hand. But I think because the draft capital was so low to get Ridder, let him play. And he said if they're bad, they're bad. Then they get another high draft pick next year. You never want to be a middling team because that's the worst place to be. But I did love the picks in that range. Not really for fantasy, but I think from an NFL perspective, they were just good solid options in that range.
Yeah, and looking at it for fantasy, so I just did a quick show on Sunday to try to get my head around things because a lot of people are doing rookie. Dynasty is really, really intense. People are already doing rookie drafts. It was like Monday. We're dropping the rookie drafts. We're going, and so to get my head around it, I did a show, and I have these quarterbacks all in like the mid to late 2nd round of a super flex draft, with the caveat that these are luxury picks. So if you are a top half team and you don't necessarily need somebody now, and you don't need to necessarily have that instant value or instant production, then Ridder, Corral, Malik Willis are interesting for fantasy in like the mid to late 2nd. But if you're a back end team and you need somebody, then don't do that. Start taking shots at some of these, some of the running backs that are back there. Spiller, who ended up not in a great landing spot in terms of like instant production, but in a decent landing spot for some production, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm with Sam. I like it more for the NFL than I do for fantasy. It will be interesting to me to see how, and I don't know if you probably saw this, but Tannehill, they asked Tannehill about mentoring Malik Willis, and he said, no, it's not my job. It'll be interesting to see that dynamic where you've got the young kid who was fairly highly touted in the not just fantasy football circles, but also with the Senior Bowl. And I mean, everyone said he was the best thrower of the football, and so it'll be interesting to see that dynamic take place with Tannehill and Malik Willis. I'm interested to see that one.
A real Favre-like move from the veteran Tannehill there with that comment. Speaking about the drafts, just to hit on this last part here, and then we can move on into some other positions. But you're talking about these drafts that are already happening. I had 2 rookie drafts happening starting today in the middle of both. They're in super flex formats, both of them. Both of them had Kenny Pickett going in the middle of the first round. And I just thought, I'm stepping away and I'm going to absorb the value of these other positions that we're about to talk about. And it sounds like both you and Sam are very much of that mode probably here. And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic. And hopefully you can secure some value even as we get closer to the season, not just for us crazy freaks who are out here doing it now, but a couple months from now too, hopefully that value stands.
This is going to be such a wild rookie draft season from now until August. Like it really is, because there wasn't consensus before the draft. Draft capital didn't really change much because all of the receivers got it. None of the quarterbacks got it. So that it's this really strange. It feels a little bit like 2019. It feels a little bit like 2016, where you didn't necessarily have consensus. There wasn't somebody that, was immediately obviously up at the top, where you didn't have 4 or 5 guys that were going to fall in the same direction. Like I have seen Drake London go off the board at 1. I've seen Garrett Wilson go off the board at 1. I have seen Burks go off the board at 1. You've seen the running backs, you've seen Breece Hall go off the board. I've even seen Kenneth Walker go off the board at 1. And that's not even talking about the quarterbacks that sometimes you see still sneaking up into the first round, even though they got 3rd round capital. So it's going to be wild. And I agree with you. We just reap the value on this happening, but it's also a rookie draft where if you have a guy, man, move up and go get him. And if you don't, then be happy with what you got.
Yep. Yeah, I had a draft start immediately Saturday night after the NFL draft started or finished. And I just kind of let it fall to me. I was at the 107 and just let it fall to me. And it was fun.
You guys
anyway,
are hardcore.
That's what we do.
I
didn't want to do it, to be
but...
fair. Yeah, my commissioners just made this whole thing. I don't want to be a part of that.
All right, well, let's bounce to tight ends, because that's probably be the quickest conversation we'll have here this evening, and we don't want to end the show on a quick note like that. So tight ends, nothing in the first round, no Kyle Pitts this year, but we had Trey McBride going to Arizona in the 2nd round. I think that's an interesting spot for him. He's got some time to learn behind Zach Ertz there. It's a high flying offense. We know they like to pass a lot. So do you guys think he can develop into a serviceable tight end in Superflex, or he'll just end up being one of those in that 7 to 10 range for tight ends that doesn't really matter all that much?
The new Tyler Higby of the world.
Yeah.
Right. I think he could be, obviously. I mean, I think the landing spot is excellent. Really good offense. He doesn't have to be the tight end 1 remotely close to now. He can sit behind Ertz for a year or 2. I'm not sure what his contract looks like, if it's going to be prohibitive of them re-signing him long-term again if Ertz wants another deal or whatever. But I mean, from a tight end perspective, because there really wasn't a Kyle Pitts in this class and it was kind of a weak tight end class after McBride, I think 2nd round draft capital in the NFL draft was totally fine. in a tight end premium league, I still probably wouldn't take him earlier than if it was super flex tight end premium. I'd probably take him like in the early second, because I think the tier drop off of the talent in like the mid to late first. And if you're really just not comfortable taking those quarterbacks yet, I think it just really opens things up for some of that other value to slide up. So yeah, I think McBride is borderline top 15 rookie pick.
Zach?
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with Sam there. I may have him down just a little bit, but it depends on the premium too. And I think we get caught up in tight end premium when you hear that and you're like, oh, I got to have tight ends. It really only affects about 7 guys, because there are only about 7 tight ends who get 100 plus targets every year. And so those are the guys that are going to end up getting that premium. I do like Trey McBride. He was my tight end 1 coming in pre-draft, leaves as the tight end 1, probably a mid-second in a tight end premium, and probably early third if you don't have that tight end premium, because I kind of shrug at tight ends most of the time. And unless you have one of the top 5 guys, it doesn't really matter. They're all the same.
I was just about to ask, you mentioned these 7 guys that are going to get these 100 targets. Can you tell me who they are? Because I never know any given year, and I always suck at tight ends, and I'm tired of it. I need some help.
We'll work on. I'll effort that. We'll get that offline. But I have somewhere one of these tabs in my phone is just tight end targets. So
your Rolodex of information. Is there anybody at all beyond McBride that we're actually interested in then from this class?
I mean, the only other one that I've got to name is Jelani Woods, and that's just athleticism, and that's one of the markers when you're looking at tight ends is athleticism. And I wish Kyle was still doing this with the Dynasty Dummies, but Kyle, who is my previous co-host, used to do a cheat sheet, which was like athletic metrics. And I have never found anybody who is able to hit late round tight ends and predict the productivity like Kyle with his cheat sheet. I mean, he hit Kittle, he hit Mark Andrews. I mean, it was just and Kelsey before that. Like, it was incredible watching this run of tight ends. But most of that was athletic production, or athletic measurables, and that's what you're looking for outside of production. It's look for those athletic tight ends, because those are going to be the guys that end up being your uber producers, and there aren't very many of them. And that's not to say that everybody who's athletic is going to be that, but that is a pretty big ingredient in that pie.
Kahale Waring. I did it, Dustin. That's the 1 millionth reference to Kahale Waring on this podcast. I was expecting balloons, but I don't see any balloons at the moment.
Well, it's basically we have to bring him up at least once a show now. Yeah, Sam, anyone else you'd be even remotely interested in this class?
Not really, no. Yeah, Woods is fine. The guy Denver drafted is fine. He'll be, he's at least interesting because they lost Noah Fant. Was it Greg Dulcich? Can't pronounce his last name. Again, interesting just from a positional perspective on what's available on the team, but I'm not really interested in drafting any other tight ends besides McBride. I'll just spend that draft capital taking, backup running backs, guys that I think will have a little bit more insulated value long-term over waiting for a guy to maybe give me a top 12 tight end season. And like was said before, once you get past the top handful of options, tight end like 6 to 16, they're all the same. Tight end 16 just had like 2 less touchdowns than tight end 6. Then you're really just chasing that touchdown upside once you get past the top handful of players.
As the super tight end expert, I just wanted to throw in real quick my 2 cents on the matter, which is if you're in a start 8 tight end league, you should be picking up Jake Ferguson like immediately. And that's not my Wisconsin homerism speaking at all.
I will say my favorite pick of this entire draft, and not for fantasy and not for NFL, was Jeremy Ruckert to the Jets. So Sal Lito, who does the Scott Fishbowl Podathon, does stuff with the Fantasy Football Funhouse with us. He is friends with the family, the Ruckert family. He coached Jeremy Ruckert in soccer, and Jeremy Ruckert was a Jets fan from when he was knee high to the grasshopper. So seeing Ruckert drafted by the Jets was awesome. That was fun for me.
That is cool. Very cool. I like that. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver class then, where I think there's been a lot of excitement about this wide receivers group. Had quite the run in the first round, much to the chagrin of us Packer fans here. The run started a little bit earlier than we had hoped, but you had 6 go off the board with Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jamison Williams, Jahan Dotson, and Treylon Burks. And I just want to add, if people have had their head in the sand, the Treylon Burks trade, they traded AJ Brown to the Eagles, which has great fantasy impact as well. Basically, in that trade, used that pick for the replacement. So any strong feelings about any of these day one wide receivers that were drafted here, or are they just all going to be studs?
Yeah, I really like the London pick to Atlanta. I think that was spot on. I like that they didn't have to really move too much to get him. The Burks one was kind of fun. I mean, as a big AJ Brown fan, I was a little sad to see him leave Tennessee to go to Philadelphia. But it was kind of a savvy football move by the Titans to say, we're just going to reset a rookie contract on a big-bodied athletic wide receiver that we think we can still get some decent production out of. He was due a lot of money, and he signed that 4-year, $100 million contract with Philadelphia. And the Titans just said, okay, that's fine. We're going to draft athletically someone who we think is similar, not quite to the same specimen that AJ Brown is. But yeah, the run started early, and I was way okay with the Packers not taking a guy in round 1 at that point, because they probably would have still drafted Christian Watson at that point. So they just got him in round 2 instead of getting him in round 1. I really wasn't a fan of the Saints move up or the Commanders move up to get Olave and Dotson. Love them both. I don't like the Saints trading up for a 4-year player who returned to school and was not an early declare and really didn't get better by going back to school. So that wasn't a big fan pick by me. And same thing with Dotson. I think he's going to be a fine NFL player, but his size doesn't really correlate well to success that we've seen from players that are built similarly to him. And it's not a knock on him as a player. I think he'll be fine. But to spend that significant amount of draft capital, I think Washington just kind of got caught up in the run and wanted to get a guy. And I don't know if it was their guy or not. But overall, I think the value there is fine. I think we definitely have a very clear 1-2 with Burks and or London, whatever order you want to put them in. I don't think I'm quite as high on Wilson as others because I don't really know what Zach Wilson is yet. And now that we know what they ended up doing to the running back position the following day, still have Elijah Moore. I think Wilson's fine, but yeah, overall, I think it's a good strong class. We got spoiled the last few years, but I don't have any big concerns about getting some good productive talent out of these wide receivers in day one.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to call out Mike Fiala in the chat real quick, saying hi, friends. I'm very curious to see if there's a wide receiver in this bunch that he could compare to his favorite sandwich, and who that might be, and what the crossover is there. I'm not sure. But I would love to know that. So, Mike, if you're hanging around, please do let us know. Zach, anybody in that first group that is just your head over heels with?
So I've been a big Treylon Burks fan throughout this whole process. He was my wide receiver 1. It was interesting to me because basically everybody that was in that top 8 or 9 wide receiver group got first or second round capital. And so things didn't really change much for me in terms of the way I ranked them for fantasy, because I'm pretty much agnostic to landing spots with wide receivers. Draft capital matters to me, but you've seen it so many times where good wide receivers will drive targets. It doesn't matter where they are. I mean, AJ Brown, that was a terrible landing spot in Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't throw the ball very much. And that it didn't play out that way. Everybody thought that AJ Brown was going to be, buried there. And so, and you see that time and time again. So it didn't really change things. The one wide receiver that I was interested to see get first round capital though was Jamison Williams in Detroit. And it was because of that injury. So you see a player who was utilizing his speed as his primary weapon. And to see that injury late, it's nice to know that the NFL they get access to medicals that we don't ever see. And it was nice to see him get early first round capital to kind of stay up in that bunch. So again, it really didn't move much, but it was nice to see that everybody got draft capital.
That's an underrated aspect, I think, sometimes to the draft is like, what do we actually learn from it? Sometimes it's that the issues or perceived issues that we have with a player, the NFL team does not. And so we should probably trust that more than we trust our pre-draft opinions. I did want to call out here, Mike got back to us about his sandwich comparison, and he says, Treylon Burks is like a nice grilled cheese, extremely versatile and delivers every single time. Mike, I don't know. I can't argue with that. Can anybody find a good argument to that? Because I cannot.
No, it's perfect. Grilled cheese, like when it's great, it's great. And when it's not good, it's still pretty decent. Like you just can't ever really go wrong with it.
As long as you don't undercook that thing, you're fine.
No. And I love the draft capital piece as well. And like you said, Jake, what NFL teams tell us through their actions and how it either represents what we as the fantasy community think or not. We were so high in a lot of these quarterbacks, and the NFL was like, nope, don't care. Like we're not spending draft capital on them at all. And draft capital is the biggest piece for wide receivers for sure. You want guys that are day one or day two. Just the hit rate falls off a cliff when you get to round 4 on down. And there's just so much more player mobility now. Like it almost feels like the NBA a little bit when guys are just swapping teams every year and trying to, chase that title, which is great. I mean, more power to them. I'm always pro player when it comes to, doing what they can with their relatively short NFL careers that we just get to enjoy. But I mean, even like Marquise Brown, just moving town, AJ Brown gone. We don't really know who's going to be quarterbacking some teams for a long period of time. So yeah, just draft that talent because that talent is always going to be there. And we're just seeing now the situations are so fluid for these players. So just go get your guys, get the talented players. And it is nice to see that Jameson Williams, even with that ACL tear, those are almost just like a non-issue now. Like it's still a devastating injury when they happen, and we really feel for the players, but they're not career enders. I mean, it's more like a blip on the radar for some of these guys that come back in a year and a half, 2 years, and they're still great. They're elite, and they can still do what they did pre-injury. It just takes them a little bit longer. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think if you hit anything you hit everything on the head. Let's be honest, Sam. But the one thing is like draft that talent. Look no further than Brandon Cooks, folks. Here's a man who has been on 1,000 different teams with 1,000 different quarterbacks, and the talent wins out every time. So I love that. And again, any chance I get to talk about Brandon Cooks, I'm always geeking to do that.
All right, let's chat a little bit about the second round wide receivers. So we had Christian Watson, Wendell Robinson, John Mechie, Taquan Thornton, George Pickens, Alec Pierce, and Sky Moore. Which of these do you think will have probably the best, which had the best probably landing spot, do you think? And I know, Zach, you're saying that landing spot doesn't really matter all that much, but just from opportunity wise, with these second round picks.
So there were 3 players that were, obvious to me pre-draft that ended up with second round capital. So Christian Watson is one, and I'll throw you that bone. Like he is raw, but very good downfield. Like there were so many plays where you watch him and he just was alone behind the secondary because he outran the coverage. And the quarterback either didn't see him or didn't get the ball there. That's something that Aaron Rodgers will see, and Aaron Rodgers will get him the ball if he can overcome the rawness. The kind of Rodgers sometimes gets a little cranky. He's like Brady in that respect, where like sometimes you lose trust. Sky Moore, I think landing in Kansas City is going to drive his dynasty value higher than I'm willing to pay. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited about Kansas City, that landing spot. For me, though, the wide receiver who landed in a great spot, who I had as my wide receiver 3 going into this process, is George Pickens. And George Pickens has probably the lowest floor of anybody on this. Like he could do something completely stupid and be out of the league. Like he's got that in him. You've seen him get into fights on the field, but when he is doing what he does, there is nobody that has a higher ceiling than he did. I compared him to the Basilica. I said, he's got that cathedral ceiling. Yeah, don't pay any attention to the crypt below. I mean, it's there, but you come for the ceiling. And so Pickens to Pittsburgh, especially with their track record, and this is narrative now, and so this doesn't necessarily factor into my rankings, makes you feel a little better. But Pittsburgh has been really good at identifying wide receivers, and the fact that they identified Pickens, spent a second-round pick, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, Pickens was a fun pick for them, for sure. For me, I guess the biggest standout, and I'm totally going to go with landing spot, and I don't even care at this point, it's Sky Moore. And say what you will about vacated targets, and I was just writing this down earlier. Tyreek Hill left behind a ton of volume. Over the last 2 years, he totaled almost 300 targets, almost 200 receptions, 2,500 receiving yards, and 24 touchdowns. Now, again, I get it. Vacated targets, whatever argument you want to say, Peter Howard's turning over in his house somewhere when hearing me talk about vacated targets. I get it. But I still think the Chiefs' offense is going to be good. Their head coach, their quarterback are still incredible. Kelsey's still going to anchor that number one pass catching role. But beyond that, Sky Moore could legitimately become the number one wide receiver for this team. I think he can be. He comps very well. One of my favorite tools that I use over on RotoViz is their prospect box score scout. And it combines a whole bunch of college production metrics. And then it also takes into account draft capital, weight, and 40 time. And he comped to Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, and Kelvin Ridley were 3 of his 5 closest comps coming out. So Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, Kelvin Ridley. And I'm not really worried about a lot of the other pass catchers on the Chiefs. They brought over Juju Smith-Schuster. He's on a 1-year deal, but it's super incentive heavy. It's a $3 million contract, but it's up to $10 million when you build in incentives. So there's a lot of extra stuff built in, but they didn't give him much. They brought over MVS from the Packers. That's fine. They did pick up Justin Ross, undrafted, which is kind of exciting. Nicole Hardman, we've seen him. We know who he is. I was a big Hardman truther for a while, and I'm never going to drop him from a dynasty roster because I'm just going to – I can't do it. I'm just going to ride him until I can't anymore. But, there's really nobody else on that roster in the wide receiver room who I'm okay, this guy is legitimately going to step up and be consistent. And I don't know if that's going to be more either. But I think if anyone's got a chance right now, just maybe because he's the new shiny toy and Tyreek Hill is gone, I just think there's such good potential there for him. And I'm cherry picking some stats for sure to kind of fit my own warm and fuzzy narrative. But just seeing him get top 55 overall draft capital, I think he was 54th overall. That was cool. Coming from, Western Michigan, but it's exciting.
I'm interested with Sky Moore for sure because so much we've already talked in previous episodes on this show about what is it going to look like the target distribution from Pat Mahomes now that Hill's gone, because it was 2 guys and only 2 guys that he was throwing to, Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. And now half of that equation is out of town. Does the collective group that they brought in, are they good enough? I still maintain that every single guy that they've added, maybe even Justin Ross, if he stays healthy, is better than whatever was behind Tyreek Hill previously on that team. So if all of them are at least better than that, does he maybe spread it out more? Or does he find just his new fixation? In which case, if that's Sky Moore, then that's going to be an amazing pick for the rookie, obviously. So it'll be really interesting to see how that actually pans out.
And I think, too, because the Packers and the Chiefs were 2 of the most trendy landing spots for wide receivers, just to see what they were doing. And Moore was already kind of becoming the new hotness wide receiver for a lot of people, in the week leading up to the draft anyways. He was kind of well outside the top group, it felt like a couple months ago. Then all of a sudden, in the last 10 days, it was Sky Moore, kind of kept creeping up people's draft boards. And he gets, at least on paper, probably the perfect landing spot with a legitimate path to opportunity that doesn't take too many mental gymnastics to figure out that, hey, this guy could actually be semi-relevant for fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk or ask you guys' opinion real quickly here about Wendell Robinson going to the Giants. Now, I know he flashed really great. He looked awesome last year, and I know he's converted from running back over to wide receiver. But with the Giants, they invested in Kadarius Toney last year. They have Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard. They got a bunch of guys there already. So it felt like this was a little bit of an odd pick for me, just knowing their wide receiver room already. And I understand that last year there was a lot of health issues with that group. But how do you see him fitting in? And did you find this as odd a selection as I did?
Yeah, I was not really thrilled with the pick. Again, I like Wendell as a player. I think he's a fine player, but he's just, looking at his metrics right now, he measured in at 68 inches, 178 pounds. Tony was 71 inches, 193. So they kind of almost drafted like a shorter, lighter version of Tony. Now, again, trying to remove all of the off the field issues, or at least seemingly fit issues with the Giants right now that Kadarius Toney has. He was still electric with the ball in his hands. Like, dude could make plays when you give him a little bit of space, which is cool. I feel like the pick could have been used a little bit better for the Giants. I wasn't thrilled with the landing spot, considering they have a similarly stylistic player on the team already. Again, love the player, think he'll do well, but just doesn't seem to be a great fit.
No, and it felt really strange because there was the rumors swirling around Kadarius Toney and whether or not the Giants were going to move on from him, like during the draft. And then they made that Wandale Robinson pick, and it felt a little bit reminiscent of the Chiefs when they made that pick with Nicole Hardman, and they were like, we don't know what's going on, with Tyreek Hill, so we're gonna draft a replacement. It's tough to do, and exactly like Sam said, he's a smaller player, he's a space player, he's a player you're gonna have to manufacture touches for, and if you have two of those guys, your offense is gonna be ugly.
Fair enough. All right. Anyone else here in from the third round and beyond that either of you want to talk about that you think either landing in a good spot or is going to have really good opportunity? Zach, I can see you're chomping at the bit here. Go for it.
Yes, and it's a UDFA, and I am so happy that the medicals checked out and Justin Ross landed in Kansas City. Justin Ross is legit, and the only reason he fell was the congenital fusion of his neck and the surgery and the medicals, and having Kansas City go through, make sure everything was good, and then signing him to that UDFA contract. I am actually excited about Justin Ross, and I'm excited about him in Kansas City. That offense could be absolutely dangerous. We just listed all the players that they added, and then you add a wide receiver out of Clemson who, when he was healthy in his first year, was absolutely dominant on a team that had two other NFL players, and it's, man, that's the one. And just from a humanity perspective, seeing him sign, I'm happy that he's there. So that's the one for me that's beyond the pale, beyond the second round, beyond the third round, beyond the entire draft. That UDFA signing of Ross.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. He was the only guy that I was going to bring up, so he laid out the argument perfectly. And I think we just have to trust, as not NFL people, that these teams are doing their due diligence. And I genuinely think they are. I know it was really frustrating, just as a human, as a person, someone who, has been rooting for Justin Ross for a while, to see him fall totally outside the top 7 rounds and go undrafted. But it was really cool that he didn't have to wait too long to land with a team that I think, if there's ever going to be a chance, and we can always play the landing spot card, and the Chiefs will always be a fun landing spot for us to talk about as long as Patrick Mahomes is there, and that's fine. But to see him have the chance that, look, if he's going to break out anywhere, there's a good chance that it's here, and that's going to be really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. All right, let's round out our conversation for the evening here with the running backs. And I don't think to anyone's surprise, no one drafted in the first round. I think more or less those days are over with altogether. So in the second round, we had Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, and James Cook. RIP to my Michael Carter love here with Breece Hall being drafted there. That was a little disappointing just for me personally, because I really thought we were going to see the Carter breakout this year.
You know what, Dustin? Breece did do that to us personally. I take it as a personal attack that he chose to do that to the two of us.
Yes, but I really like what the Jets are doing there and building their team. Looks like they're finally getting things right. So it's going to be exciting to see him on that offense, and hopefully Zach Wilson, let's be honest, he really can't do worse than he did last year as a rookie. So I'm looking forward to that offense. And Kenneth Walker going to Seattle, I think that speaks volumes with Chris Carson, another one of our favorites here on the show, unfortunately. But he's going to have awesome opportunity there. I think that's a really good landing spot for him. How do you guys feel about that spot for Walker?
Yeah, I think to me that was the best landing spot possible for him, even though you're going to see a little bit of a downturn with the quarterback play. I mean, no offense to Drew Lock, but it's going to be worse than it was with Russell Wilson. They're probably not going to be as effective scoring. But man, Pete Carroll loves to run the ball, and Kenneth Walker runs the ball really well. He was the best runner in this class, bar none. Breece Hall was my running back one, but Kenneth Walker was the best runner of the football. So I really like that spot for him.
Yeah, nobody establishes the run and chews gum quite like Pete Carroll. There's just no getting around it. No, I agree though. That was a fun landing spot, and I think we're kind of assuming now that Chris Carson's career, at least as being far as fantasy relevant, is probably done at this point, which is frustrating due to the nature of his injury and how there's such a fantasy value he felt every year. He always just seemed to be kind of underrated, underdrafted, but he always produced. But it was nice to see the NFL. I think from a fantasy perspective, they're getting smarter. Not that we are to judge the fantasy or judge the NFL community, but they didn't spend significant draft capital on quarterbacks. They're done drafting running backs in the first round because they don't matter. We missed out on the ever coveted Breece Hall to Buffalo landing spot, but yeah, I mean, the Jets are surrounding Zach Wilson with talent. Like, this is going to be, it's got to be a good step up here for him, or this is kind of a make it or break it for him. I think probably one of my favorite picks, though, jumping ahead even past day 2, was Isaiah Spiller to the Chargers. I think he will complement what Eckler does so well, and Eckler's never been a high volume rushing attempt back. Not that he can't be, but they've just never really utilized him in that way. He's just such a prolific pass catcher. He can be a goal line back. We saw that. I think he scored 20 touchdowns this last year, and a good chunk of those were through the air, but he can run between the tackles, but he doesn't have to, which again will be frustrating for fantasy managers because we want him to be that 300 touch guy. But it's been fun to see, or will be fun to see, I think, Spiller, Roundtree, Jackson, they're not viable backups. So he will definitely step into that role and I think be pretty decent from day one. So to see him even only get round 4 draft capital, I think it was a great fit for what that offense wants to do.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question about that, actually, because Spiller was one of my big-time question marks where I did, yes, of course, go to the Chargers, and that's wonderful. However, you cycle through the guys who have been behind Austin Eckler previously. You got your Joshua Kelly, your Justin Jackson, Larry Roundtree, et cetera. Not saying that any of these guys are Isaiah Spiller. I do wonder what we project the actual splits to look like there. I mean, are we talking, is Isaiah Spiller in line for, say, 150 carries? Is that within the realm of possibility for him, or maybe even beyond?
I think that's probably on his high end range of outcomes for this year. And who knows? We'll see how the offseason goes, kind of how they game plan and want to develop that offense to fit the new running back skill set, or how they want to integrate Spiller into what they want to do. But I would say 100 carries is probably his floor. I don't know how much more he'll get than that. It probably depends on how good the offense is. We know that division is incredibly difficult. We'll see what kind of game scripts the Chargers find themselves in this year, having to play 6 games in division that are going to be pretty challenging across the board. But if they find themselves in some positive game scripts and really want to grind the clock and not have to lean on Justin Herbert and that wide receiver group and maybe give Austin Eckler a breather, then yeah, he can kind of work himself into a role. But I think we should expect to see some decent involvement relatively soon, I would think.
Right on.
Yeah. And the nice thing about Spiller, too, is he's not a slouch in the receiving game. He had 20 receptions or more every season at Texas A&M. So, like, he's a pass catcher, but also a big, I mean, what is he, 6'1", 215, something like that. So he's a bigger back. He can carry the ball, too. So you may see him not just spell Eckler in the grind, but also now where you get a 17-game season, you may see him actually take entire drives. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, you're not going to see him take a huge chunk away from Eckler. I mean, Eckler's still the stud on that. Like, I love, my favorite GIF of all time is Austin Eckler doing the one-hand pull-ups, reading a book. He's still that guy. But Spiller's a nice back.
Mm-hmm. And then just briefly here, a couple guys I want to ask you too about. One that I think probably will be jumping up a lot of the not crazy fantasy people like us draft boards, more of the average Joe out there, is Damien Pierce landing with Houston. But then I also want to get your thoughts on Atlanta drafting Tyler Algier, if I pronounce that correctly.
Sure did.
So first, let me tackle Algier. He is an interesting back. We'll say that. I'm trying to be polite. I don't know if Mrs. Algier is listening. Like he was very good in the conference that he was in. He had a lot of breakaway runs, but they were really well blocked. Like it was a wide open hole. It's a good landing spot for him because the Atlanta backfield is a wide receiver playing running back and a running back wishing he was still a running back. So it's kind of an open or a more open backfield. But I'm not super excited about Algier. And I'm going to throw a little more cold water. Damien Pierce, I know a lot of people a lot smarter than I am like Damien Pierce. He's got the best vision of anybody I watched, but it only goes for 3 yards. And after that, like he has real trouble creating. He does a fantastic job kind of driving the defense where he wants to, setting up his blocks, waiting for that open hole, making that cutback, getting through the hole, and that's the end of it. So it's a good spot in Houston. He's probably the best option they have for now, but he's not a great option long term. So to me, he's a back that if you're in the late second round of a draft, you either draft him, wait till he gets a job, and then trade him, or if somebody's really excited about going to get Damien Pierce, trade out of that pick.
Does anybody know an undue pick in a rookie draft, by the way? Just a totally unrelated question. I'm just curious. Is there an undo button for drafting a guy?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
What'd you do, Jake?
I took him in the middle of the second like a damn chump. God.
No, see, I like that, though, because my only pushback on Damien Pierce, he might only get 3 yards a carry, but volume is everything for running backs. And that'll be his saving grace. And I agree. He's probably going to be in a situation where if he gets off to a really good start his rookie year, he's probably an easy sell if you can get a decent return for him. Because I'm in agreement there. I don't envision him being a long-term viable option. Not that his draft capital is prohibitive. He was a 4th-round pick. But yeah, he's probably their best running back he's probably the best running back on the roster right now. And that's not really saying a lot. So it's not a knock on him, but I think it's just a testament to the depth chart because there isn't one. But I do think he'll be a lock for pretty significant work. And I think he can handle it. He didn't really get a chance to have it in college, but I think he has the physical stature in order to manage that type of workload that they'll probably get without too much difficulty in Houston.
Yeah, he's a steal. If you had a good team last year and you could end up with a running back too in the mid-second, like that's good. Like you're liking that. If we're talking like long-term fantasy production, maybe not. I really wish you could like Frankenstein together Damien Pierce and Kevin Harris, because Kevin Harris runs like a madman, doesn't have any vision. Damien Pierce has all the vision and just I want them together. I just with our powers combined, we're Captain Planet.
You need to have like one of them controlling the other with a remote. I think
on
that's
the
how you get that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are closing in on an hour here, and I want to be cognizant of our guest time here. So I want to end the show here with 2 questions, and I'll throw it to each of you individually. So first question I have is, if there's one player that we haven't talked about yet that you want to pound the table for and say why we should be looking at this player, go for it. And then 2, in your rookie drafts, who's the one player you're not leaving without?
For me, I don't know if I really want to pound the table for him, but I think it's just such an intriguing player and draft spot with David Bell. He didn't really come up in our discussion at all today, but he's been in a discussion for being one of the top end wide receivers for this class for a while, at least in the Devy community. So to see him slip to round 3, not really overly worried about it. Landing spot is interesting. Quarterback spot for that team is going to be interesting to follow, at least for the first half of this year. We'll see what all shakes out in Cleveland, but that'll be fun. It's kind of an open depth chart, kind of a muddied quarterback situation. Could be great, could be terrible. But I think with the draft capital that he has and what I think it'll cost to get him in rookie drafts, I think he'll be a fun one that probably has a pretty extensive range of outcomes. And then for me, probably I got to go with Sky Moore as the guy I'm probably not going to leave without, because I think you'll be able to get him late first, depending on where people maybe want to take Pickett. If they want to take another running back there. But I'm excited. He was kind of the guy I like to talk about earlier today because I think he just has that big upside and a great landing spot.
Zach?
I love the David Bell. David Bell, I'll bring my notebook up. David Bell is on my list to talk about, but I'll pivot. I'll go further down. I'll go way down. And the guy that I will tap the table for is a 6th-round running back. Keonta Ingram ended up in Arizona. The best back in Arizona is John Connor. The second best back in Arizona is probably Keonta Ingram. Keonta Ingram can catch passes, and he can spell in case of an injury. So that is a very late round pick that I think could end up paying huge dividends in your dynasty league for this year and potentially beyond. And if we're talking about a guy that I am not leaving my rookie drafts without, I already talked about him. It's the Basilica. It is George Pickens, because people are much lower than I am on Pickens. So I can get what I consider a deal. And it's not quite in the same vein as A.J. Brown a couple of years ago and Justin Jefferson a couple of years ago, where you could get my wide receiver 1 at like 208, 209, 210. I mean, 108, 109, 110. But it's a similar, it's like, if you look at an angle and kind of squint, it's that same process.
I love that. And I love that you called back out Justin Jefferson. I still remember having you on this, I think the first time talking about Justin Jefferson. And, as an anti-Vikings guy, I just wrote you off entirely.
All right. Well, yeah, I think we've hit our hour here. I think this was great. I want to thank both of you for coming on. I'll give you both some time here to tell us where people can find you, anything you want to promote that you're doing. Just throw it all out there. Zach, let's start with you.
So I am over at the DFP at work, the only at work in town, Dynasty Dummies podcast, the occasional guy on the couch for Peter Howard's weekly grind on the DLF stream. But the most important thing I want to talk about, and I'll do this quick, but it deserves attention, is the Scott Fish Bowl and the Scott Fish Bowl Podathon. That's all coming up. Charity, Toys for Tots. This year, the Scott Fish Bowl Podathon is going to be July 9th and 10th, and it is going to be 36 hours. And we're going to raise some serious money. Sal, Kevin, and Steve are driving that. And if you're around, stop by, donate. It's a good time. It's a great cause. So that's really the important stuff.
Heck yes.
Yeah,
man, I don't have anything quite as wholesome to plug as that, but I will definitely echo everything that the Scott Fish Bowl stands for. It's an incredible opportunity, whether you're a part of it or not. I think just what it represents to this fantasy community and beyond is unmatched, and it's really cool. So if it pushes you or inspires you in any way to give back or to donate or to do something good for those around you, I think that's the biggest takeaway. But yeah, you can find a lot of my written work now. Haven't written much for Rotoviz lately. I've been doing a lot of work for the Fantasy Life newsletter. Been hanging out with Jake a little bit more over there, which has been awesome. But helping run some social media for FTN Network, and yeah, just hanging out and doing a bunch of different things and having a ton of fun. So thank you guys for the opportunity to jump on tonight.
Yeah, Jake, any last words here before we sign off?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on our show and making us feel like an intelligent source of rookie information, because I'll tell you, without the two of you, that would not be the case. So much appreciation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. I had a lot of fun this evening. And until next week, folks, keep drinking and talking fantasy football.
Cheers, FFers.